My daughter called me. We're leaving tomorrow. Your beach house and car have already been sold by... I was at the doctor and replied, I understand, but you forgot something. She asked, what are you talking about? I laughed out loud because the house she sold was actually... Eleanor Brooks sat quietly in the waiting room of the medical clinic, thumbing through a tattered magazine she had no interest in. The walls smelled faintly of disinfectant, and the soft hum of the vending machine filled the silence between the nurse's sporadic calls for patients. At 70 years old, Eleanor had grown used to these checkups. The doctors always said the same things. Her blood pressure was stable, her cholesterol a bit high, her memory sharp as ever. Outside the clinic window, sunlight flickered through the branches of an elm tree, casting dancing shadows on the floor. It was a peaceful morning, or at least it had been. Her phone buzzed, disrupting the silence. Eleanor looked down. Amanda. Her daughter's name appeared in bold on the screen. No photo, just a name. Her heart skipped, as it always did when Amanda called. These days, her daughter only called when something was wrong. Hello. Eleanor answered, already bracing herself. There was a pause. Then Amanda's voice came through, flat and cold. May, we're leaving tomorrow. Just wanted to let you know, she said, switching between English and the affectionate Portuguese that Eleanor had used to raise her. The beach house and your car, they've been sold. Everything's handled. You don't have to worry about a thing. Eleanor didn't respond immediately. Her fingers clenched around the armrest of the chair. The words didn't register at first. The beach house? Her car? Amanda continued. I know it's sudden, but we found a place in Arizona. Better for Jason's work. And, yeah, it's done. We're going. Bye. There was no explanation, no softness in the tone, just a clinical detachment, as though Eleanor were a tenant being notified of an eviction. After everything she had given, after the years Amanda and Jason had spent living with her during their rough patch, this was the thanks? Eleanor took a breath, then another. The world around her had gone quiet. Even the humming vending machine seemed to fade into nothing. She heard her voice, calm and measured. I see, she said. Amanda was already impatient. What do you mean? You forgot something, Eleanor replied. There was a pause. What? She didn't answer. Instead, Eleanor smiled softly, a private knowing smile, and ended the call. She didn't cry. Not there, not in the clinic. Instead, she placed the phone back in her purse, stood, and told the nurse she'd have to reschedule. She needed to go home, not out of panic, not out of confusion, but because something had shifted deep inside her. Something solid had risen from a place long dormant. Not anger, not sadness. Resolve. The drive back was silent. The streets of her quiet suburban neighborhood rolled by like memories. The church she used to take Amanda to on Sundays, the cafe where she had celebrated her retirement, the corner where her husband had once picked wildflowers and handed them to her just because. Inside the house, everything looked exactly as it always had. The photos on the wall showed the illusion of a happy family. Amanda as a teenager on prom night, Jason awkwardly holding a fishing rod, Eleanor and her late husband, Thomas, smiling in the sun. A home filled with years of life, trust, and quiet sacrifice. Eleanor walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and stood by the window. The ocean shimmered in the distance. That beach house had been Thomas's pride, built with decades of savings and weekend sweat. The car, a 1972 Pontiac Lemons convertible, was a relic of their youth, a symbol of their first road trip as newlyweds. They were not just items. They were legacies. And now, Amanda had decided to strip them away, as if they were hers to claim, hers to discard. Eleanor finished her water and walked upstairs to her bedroom. She opened the closet and reached for a dusty metal box tucked behind winter coats. Her hands were steady. Inside, she found a folder marked Brooks Trust, Legal and Personal Documents. She hadn't looked at this in years, but Thomas had insisted she keep it safe. Just in case, he had said, always a step ahead, always the planner. Eleanor had humored him, but now she felt a quiet surge of gratitude. She opened the folder and began reading. The beach house wasn't hers alone. Years ago, Thomas had legally placed it in a nonprofit community trust under his name, a gesture to protect their retirement dreams and support local initiatives. She had never thought it would matter. Until now. The car? Legally registered as a long-term exhibit, on loan to the Coastal Vintage Automotive Museum. Eleanor had kept it in their garage for sentimental reasons, with full approval from the museum. But technically, it wasn't hers to sell and never had been. Amanda hadn't known. Amanda had assumed, and in her greed, she had gambled everything. Eleanor closed the folder gently. Her husband's signature stared back at her from the documents. She could almost hear his voice. Protect what matters, Ellie, even from the people you love. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding the folder on her lap. Her daughter had tried to erase her, to rewrite the story in a way that left Eleanor with nothing. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning, Eleanor rose before dawn. The early light washed her bedroom in a soft blue glow, brushing over the worn quilt at the foot of the bed and the framed photo of Thomas on the nightstand. The house was still and silent, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She pulled on a cardigan, padded downstairs barefoot, and made herself a cup of black coffee, strong and bitter the way Thomas used to like it. She didn't linger over breakfast. There was work to be done. The folder from the night before sat on the kitchen table, open, its papers neatly aligned. Eleanor sifted through them again, slower this time. She made phone calls, left messages, and confirmed appointments. Her voice was calm and measured, but there was a quiet urgency in her tone that the receptionist at the county clerk's office picked up on. By 9 o'clock in the morning, Eleanor had already spoken with 2 attorneys and the director of the Automotive Museum. The responses were nearly identical. Disbelief, followed by concern, and then swift agreement to take action. She had always hated confrontation. In her 35 years of teaching high school English, she had diffused more teenage arguments than she could count, always favoring peace over punishment. But now she saw that peace wasn't always gentle. Sometimes it was forged through uncomfortable truth. In the garage, the Pontiac sat under a protective tarp, undisturbed, its outline still sharp with age and care. Eleanor ran her hand along the edge of the hood, then pulled the cover back halfway. The faded red paint glinted faintly in the morning sun, and she could almost hear the sound of the engine rumbling across a mountain highway. Thomas at the wheel, hair tousled by the wind, laughing as they sped toward nowhere in particular. That memory lived in her body, not just in her mind. She carefully took a photo of the vehicle and texted it to museum curator, along with a message confirming it had never been removed without their knowledge or permission. Within an hour, she received a formal letter stating that any attempt to sell or transfer the vehicle without the museum's approval would constitute legal misuse of loan property. The curator offered to dispatch a team to retrieve the vehicle for temporary safekeeping, a gesture Eleanor declined for now. She still needed the car here, not for transportation, but as a symbol, a quiet weapon in the storm she knew was coming. Her next task took her to study, a room she rarely entered since Thomas passed. Dust coated the bookshelves and the desk where he used to work on his legal cases. Even after retirement, the air was heavy with his absence. She sat in his old leather chair and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, nestled between file folders and pens that no longer worked, was a key with a single brass key, the one for Beach House safe. By early afternoon, Eleanor was at the beach house, standing on the back deck as the waves crashed against the shore below. The salt in the air clung to her skin. The house was quiet but carried the faint trace of lives recently uprooted. An overturned photo frame, a kitchen cabinet left ajar, a pair of flip-flops forgotten near the door. Amanda and Jason had been here just days ago, packing their lives into boxes, making calls, forging documents. In the master bedroom closet, Eleanor unlocked the safe and pulled out a binder. It contained the trust agreement for property, complete with notarized statements and a deed that bore not her name, but the name of the Thomas Brooks Memorial Foundation. The nonprofit Eddie Thomas had created in honor of his father, a World War II veteran who believed homes should serve communities, not greed. She flipped to the signature page, and her fingers trembled slightly when she saw Thomas's name in bold ink next to hers. They had signed it together one winter evening almost a decade ago at the kitchen table, wine glasses half full. "It's not that I don't trust Amanda," he had said, "but trust is not a guarantee of wisdom, and love doesn't mean blindness." At the time, Eleanor had smiled, touched by his foresight, even if she didn't fully understand the implications. Now, his words echoed in her mind like prophecy. She made copies of every page, scanned them into her laptop, and emailed them to both attorneys, one for the foundation and one independent. She made it clear that any unauthorized attempt to sell, rent, or claim the property would be met with immediate legal opposition. She didn't ask for revenge. She asked for protection, for clarity. By nightfall, Eleanor returned home, weary but focused. She had barely eaten. Her phone buzzed again around 10 o'clock that evening. Unknown number. She stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Mrs. Brooks?" a man's voice asked. "This is Detective Mark Evers from the County Fraud Division. I received a report from the museum and a forwarded letter from your attorney regarding a potential vehicle scam tied to your property. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" She agreed. His questions were direct. Did she give permission to her daughter or son-in-law to sell the Pontiac? Was she aware of an online listing tied to her address? Had she noticed anything missing or damage in her garage? Eleanor answered calmly. Yes, she had evidence. Yes, she could provide documentation. Yes, she was pressing charges if it came to that. The detective paused, then spoke carefully. "I'll be honest with you, ma'am. This looks like a case of attempted fraudulent transfer of property. Not uncommon when family members get desperate. If your daughter doesn't produce a withdrawal or correction in the sale records by the end of the week, the state will likely file a formal complaint." Eleanor thanked him and hung up. She sat alone in the dark for a while, the silence humming in her ears. Not long ago, she would have recoiled at the thought of calling the police on her own daughter. But now she felt no guilt. Amanda had crossed a line, not just into illegality, but into betrayal. She rose, walked to the fireplace, and lit a small log. As the flames grew, she placed Thomas's photograph on a mantel and whispered, "You were right, my love. You were right about everything." Tomorrow, Amanda would return. Eleanor didn't know if it would be with anger or tears, but either way, she would be ready. Eleanor was in the garden when Amanda arrived. It was a gray, windless morning, and the air held that strange quiet that usually preceded a storm. She had been trimming the hedges, her gloves thick with soil and sap, when the sharp sound of tires crunching against gravel drew her gaze toward the front of the house. Amanda's car came to a hard stop just feet from the porch, the passenger door flung open before the engine had even been turned off. Amanda stormed out, her hair unkempt, face flushed with panic and rage. Jason remained in the car, motionless behind the steering wheel, his eyes cast downward as though trying to vanish into the upholstery. Eleanor took off her gloves slowly and rose from her knees. She brushed the dirt from her palms with calm deliberation. Amanda was already halfway up the front steps, her voice shrill and cracking as she yelled. "What the hell did you do, May? What did you tell them? Do you have any idea what you caused?" Eleanor said nothing. She opened the screen door with composure and waited. Amanda entered the living room without being invited, pacing like a cornered animal. "The buyer is threatening to sue us for breach of contract," Amanda spat. "Jason might lose his job because his name is on half those forms. The museum called us. There's a fraud investigation now. They're saying we misrepresented ownership. And you just sat there smiling like none of this would come back to you." Eleanor walked past her daughter into the kitchen and placed a kettle on the stove. She moved unhurriedly, as though Amanda's fury were little more than background noise. It wasn't attachment. It was strength, born from the weight of 70 years lived in patience and quiet resilience. She had survived grief, betrayal, and solitude. This was just another storm she would endure. Amanda followed her into the kitchen, still trembling. "You never said any of this. You never told me about those papers, the trust, the car. You knew we were counting on that money. Why didn't you say something before?" Eleanor turned slowly, her eyes steady. "Because I hoped I wouldn't have to," she said. "Because I wanted to believe you would never do what you did. Amanda's mouth opened, then closed. Her rage was faltering, replaced by something closer to disbelief. You think I want to hurt you? Eleanor studied her daughter's face, the one she had soothed through childhood fevers, whose laugh used to echo through the halls when Thomas danced her around the living room in his socks. That face now carried the sharp edges of entitlement, the hardened lines of someone who had forgotten gratitude. I think you chose yourselves, Eleanor said. You chose convenience. You thought I was old enough not to notice and too weak to stop you. But you didn't just try to take what was mine. You tried to erase what your father built, what we built. Amanda shook her head. It was a mistake. No, Eleanor interrupted, her voice rising slightly. It was a decision. You knew what you were doing. You forged my name on the real estate documents. You posed as the owner of something you never had a legal right to. And you did it behind my back. Amanda, not out of desperation, but out of calculation. Jason had stepped inside by now, standing near the door, his expression unreadable. Eleanor turned toward him. Is that not what happened? She asked. Jason hesitated. We thought it would be temporary, he said finally, just until we got settled. Then we'd return the money somehow. We didn't mean to cause all this. Eleanor nodded slowly. But you did, and now there are consequences. Amanda's eyes welled with tears. They're going to sue us. The museum might press charges. You're letting them destroy our lives. I didn't destroy anything, Eleanor replied. You did, and now you have to face what that means. For a long moment, the kitchen was silent except for the soft whistle of the kettle. Eleanor poured the water into 2 mugs, set one in front of her daughter, but Amanda didn't touch it. Her hands trembled as she leaned against the counter, caught between anger and collapse. He left you everything, Amanda whispered. Dad, he left you all of it. But he didn't trust me enough to leave anything to me. Why? Eleanor sat at the table, her gaze softening. He loved you, Amanda, but he also knew you. He saw what I refused to see, that you've always believed love was something you could cash in when it was convenient. That trust was negotiable, and that one day you might forget where you came from. Amanda stared at her, blinking rapidly. You think I'm a bad person? No, Eleanor said gently. I think you become someone who lost her way, and I'm not sure if you know how to find your way back. Outside, the wind began to rise, rustling the trees in the yard. Eleanor looked out the window, her thoughts momentarily drifting to the past, to a little girl with scraped knees and wide eyes, clinging to her mother's skirt, to a teenager slamming doors and crying over boys who didn't deserve her, to a young woman proud and hopeful on her wedding day. Amanda had once been her heart, her purpose, but now she was a stranger, shaped by choices Eleanor could not undo. Jason cleared his throat. What happens now? Eleanor stood. Now you go home. You contact your buyer and cancel the sale. You send a written statement to the museum acknowledging the misuse of the car. And you both speak to your lawyer about how to navigate the legal consequences. That's your responsibility, not mine. Amanda looked like she wanted to scream, to throw something, to reverse time. But all she could do was nod. There was no defiance left in her, only the weight of a truth that could no longer be avoided. Eleanor walked them to the door. Before Amanda stepped outside, she turned, her voice thin. You're really not going to help us? I have helped you, Eleanor said, more times than I can count. But this time, Amanda, you'll have to help yourself. She closed the door behind them with a hand that trembled only slightly. Then she returned to her kitchen, where the tea had gone cold. The following days unfolded like a quiet aftermath, each hour bringing Eleanor deeper into a silence she had not known before. Not the peaceful, thoughtful kind that sometimes accompanied solitude, but the cold and cavernous silence of severed ties. The house, once bustling with the presence of Amanda and Jason, had returned to its former stillness, but no longer offered the same sense of refuge. It now echoed with a residue of confrontation, with the unspoken truths that had finally been dragged out into the open. Eleanor moved through it as one would move through the ruins of something once cherished, carefully, deliberately, with a heart not yet ready to mourn but no longer willing to deny. Late one evening, As twilight folded across the horizon and the last gold of sunlight slipped beneath the waves, Eleanor sat on the porch of the beach house. A warm shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and in her hands, she held an old letter Thomas had once written but never sent, something she found weeks after his funeral. In it, he spoke of Amanda with pride lacing caution, describing her bright ambition and her troubling detachment. "You always see the best in her," he had written, "and perhaps that's your gift, but I fear it may also be your blind spot." Those words had stung at the time, but now they felt like the quiet counsel of a man who had known too well the fragility of trust within a family. She folded the letter back into its envelope and placed it on the small table beside her tea. The decision that had been pressing against her for days could no longer be deferred. She would not let this moment, this betrayal, define the rest of her life. And more importantly, she would not carry its weight alone. Amanda's actions had consequences. Yes, but Eleanor's response would shape what came next. Not vengeance, not bitterness, boundaries. The next morning, Eleanor met with her attorney in town. She had requested a formal review of her will, as well as all the trust documents. Over the course of a quiet hour in a modest office filled with rows of law books and the steady hum of the ceiling fan, she rewrote her legacy, not out of spite, but clarity. Amanda and Jason would no longer be listed as primary beneficiaries. Their names were not erased entirely, but their involvement in anything that required decision-making, property management, or financial stewardship was now officially removed. The bulk of her estate, including the beach house and any remaining savings, would go to the foundation in Thomas's name, as originally intended, and she added a clause, one that stated no legal claims or challenges from family members could alter the terms. It was ironclad, final. As the attorney reviewed the documents for submission, Eleanor felt a calm she hadn't known in weeks. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was simply truth. A decision finally made. A future now hers to shape. 2 days later, Amanda returned, not in fury this time, but in quiet disbelief. She had called ahead, and Eleanor had agreed to one final meeting. They sat at the dining room table, the same one where Amanda had once scribbled math problems as a child, while Eleanor corrected essays late into the night. Now, it held a manila envelope and 2 cups of tea, untouched. Amanda looked thinner, the weight of recent events etched into the hollows beneath her eyes. She didn't speak for a long moment. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You changed everything." Eleanor nodded. "I had to. I didn't think you'd go through with it. I thought maybe after we talked, after I explained." "You explained everything, Amanda, in words and in actions." Eleanor's tone was not cold, but it held no softness either. "You made your choice, and now I've made mine." Amanda looked down at the envelope, already knowing what it contained. "You're cutting me out." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I'm setting boundaries. You'll have no legal or financial responsibility over what your father and I built. That's not punishment. It's protection for both of us." Amanda's mouth quivered, but she didn't cry. "Not yet. I was wrong," she said. "I know I was, and I'm sorry. I don't know how I became this person." Eleanor reached forward, placing a hand gently over her daughter's. "Neither do I. And I don't hate you, Amanda. I could never hate you. But I can't let you hurt me again." Amanda pulled her hand back slowly, as if accepting the weight of her mother's words in silence. The years they had shared, the laughter, the struggles, the memories, hung between them, intact but unreachable. "I don't know what to do now," Amanda said. "You begin again," Eleanor answered. "You and Jason find a place to live, find work, pay your debts, and rebuild. I will help you start over. I've already purchased 2 plane tickets, and I've cleared a small amount from my personal account to help you settle. Nothing more, nothing recurring. It's the last time I'll step in financially. From now on, your life is yours to manage." Amanda blinked, stunned. "You'd still help me? After everything?" "I'm not helping the woman who tried to steal from me," Eleanor said. "I'm helping the daughter I once held in my arms and prayed for every night. But only once more. After this, I need space. And you need to learn who you are without me rescuing you." Amanda looked away, her eyes finally brimming with tears. "I don't deserve it." "Maybe not," Eleanor said softly. "But love doesn't always wait for who deserves it. Sometimes it offers one last hand before it closes the door." Amanda stood slowly, holding the envelope to her chest. "You're really saying goodbye, aren't you?" Eleanor stood too, steadying herself against the back of the chair. "Yes, not with hate, not with anger, but with finality." At the door, Amanda turned back. "Will I ever be allowed back?" "I don't know," Eleanor said honestly. "That will depend on who you become. Not what you say, but what you choose. And that choice begins now." Amanda nodded, wiped her face, and walked down the path to the car where Jason waited. Eleanor didn't watch them drive away. She closed the door, locked it, and walked back to the table. The tea was cold again, but this time, she drank it anyway. The air along the coast grew warmer as the weeks passed, and with the shifting winds came a sense of movement that Eleanor had not felt in years. Her days began to fall into a new rhythm, quiet, intentional, and unburdened by the weight of navigating someone else's needs. There were no more unannounced knocks at the door, no more traces of tension hiding in the corners of her home. Amanda and Jason had taken the tickets and the modest assistance she had offered. Eleanor had received a brief message a week later confirming they had relocated to New Mexico. There were no further details, and Eleanor had not asked for any. Instead, she turned her attention to the space that had always brought her peace. The beach house. What had once been a sanctuary of memories had become, in recent years, a neglected remnant of her past, used occasionally, but never fully lived in since Thomas's passing. Now, standing in the center of the living room with the late morning sun streaming through the open windows, Eleanor saw something different. She no longer saw just what the house had been. She saw what it could become. She hired a small local renovation team. Not a large company, but a group of 3 retired craftsmen who had taken on community projects with a level of care that mirrored her own values. They were gentle with the house's original bones, preserving the character of the wooden beams and the weather-worn shutters, while bringing new life to the walls with soft, calming colors and wide windows that opened to the sea. The old guest rooms were transformed into open reading areas, filled with secondhand armchairs, shelves of donated books, and soft rugs that muffled every footstep. The largest room at the back of the house was converted into a meditation space, simple and quiet, overlooking the shore. The idea had come to her not as a grand vision, but as a soft whisper, something Thomas might have thought of first, had he still been alive. A place where people could come not just to escape, but to belong. Not a business, not a rental. Something slower, gentler. A community space for older adults, widows and widowers, retirees, and anyone drifting to the quieter chapters of life looking for connection without noise. She named it the Brooks Haven Center, a modest title engraved on a small bronze plaque near the porch, just beneath a wind chime that sang with every coastal breeze. Within days of the sign going up, curious neighbors stopped by. Some brought pies, others books, some only stories and memories. Eleanor welcomed them all with open arms and warm tea. Word traveled quickly, not because of advertising, but through conversations at farmers markets and morning strolls. Soon, every Tuesday and Thursday morning, a steady group began to gather, some to read, some to knit, some simply to sit in the quiet comfort of other lives unfolding nearby. Eleanor did not lead, preach, or instruct. She offered the space, the warmth, and her presence. That was enough. The Pontiac, long parked beneath a tarp and protected from the elements, also found its place in this quiet revival, restored with the help of a young mechanic who refused payment and said it was an honor to restore something with a soul. The car returned to its full beauty, a glossy red with polished chrome, a symbol not only of Eleanor's youth but of resilience and heritage. She didn't drive it. It remained in the covered space beside the house, now protected behind clear panels, with a single plaque mounted beside it. It read, simply, "For those who never forget where they came from." Visitors often stood before it in silence, touched by something they couldn't quite name. Though she had found peace in her days, there were still nights when Eleanor lay in bed and wondered about Amanda. Letters began arriving every few weeks, short, handwritten, always in Amanda's looping, uncertain script. They carried the tone of someone reaching across a great distance without knowing if their words would land. She wrote of New Mexico's dry winds, of Jason's efforts to find steady work, of the quiet guilt that came and went like a tide. Eleanor read every letter, kept each one in a box beneath her nightstand, but she never wrote back. It wasn't out of cruelty. It was the silence of a boundary she could not cross again. Some ties, once broken, didn't unravel entirely, but neither could they be retied with the same strength. Her love for Amanda had not vanished, but the trust that once gave it shape had been altered too deeply. One evening, as the center quieted and the last of the guests trickled out with murmured goodbyes, Eleanor stood at the porch and looked out at the horizon. The sea stretched endlessly, its rhythm unchanged, its voice eternal. Behind her, the rooms glowed with soft light and carried the warmth of quiet laughter, the smell of tea, and the echo of chairs scraping gently against wood. A widower named Harold had begun stopping by more frequently. Once shy, now comfortable enough to help stack books or fix a loose window latch without being asked. Eleanor noticed his presence, his quiet attentions, and welcomed them without expectation. There was no romance in it, not in the traditional sense. But there was companionship, and that, at her age, felt more sacred than anything else. She did not speak much of Amanda anymore. Those who knew her story, those who had gently inquired, understood that silence was not absence, but a form of love that had chosen to live without demand. Eleanor did not erase her daughter from her life. She simply refused to carry her weight any longer. With each passing month, the Brooks Haven Center grew, not in size, but in spirit. It became a place of laughter and rest, of quiet healing and soft rediscovery. And Eleanor, for the first time in years, felt no need to explain herself, no impulse to shrink for the sake of keeping peace. She had reclaimed something she had once forgotten was hers. Her freedom. Freedom not from responsibility or family or loss, but freedom from being the one who always sacrificed, who always forgave without pause. Now she lived with choice, with clarity. Her home, her time, her heart. Each was a gift she gave deliberately, not automatically. And in that quiet reclaiming, Eleanor Brooks found something rarer than comfort. She found peace.